Welcome to My Big Safety Challenge, a podcast all about stories of safety leadership, presented by Dale Carnegie and the Board of Certified Safety Professionals.
My name is Merle Heckman, and I'd like to welcome you to this special webinar. This is a unique webinar in that we are celebrating the first 3 seasons of a podcast that is sponsored by BCSP and the Dale Carnegie organization, and that podcast is entitled My Big Safety Challenge. This idea came across about 2 years ago. The BCSP organization just realized a need to help the safety professionals get better as they worked with people to improve their human relations skills. And so they reached out to the Dale Carnegie organization, and they asked if we would partner with them to help get the word out and to give instruction to help those safety professionals who are working hard, who are in the trenches, who are working to make a difference. And we conducted several Dale Carnegie classes along the way. Those courses have brought good results, seeing differences in cultures as folks worked with their people. Then, as a result of that, the idea of let's do a podcast. Let's get some people on the podcast that are working in the field, and especially people who are facing challenges. Because there's something about all of us. It's real easy to feel like, oh, I must be the only one. Nobody else would ever understand, or nobody else is going through this. And in reality, because we're human beings, people are going through a variety of challenges. So the idea came up, let's bring in several different professionals, whether they were in face-to-face here in the studios here in Indianapolis, or whether they were on a Teams call, and we would talk to them about their big safety challenges, and we would incorporate principles of Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. So we had an idea for a podcast, we had a host, but we needed a co-host to help us. And so today in studio are the first 3 co-hosts that have joined us to help guide these podcasts. So we're going to take a bit of time to let you know who they are. We're going to take a bit of time to do some reflecting along the way of lessons we'll learn. And then we're even going to be able to challenge one another to step up our game and continue to go forward in our work of guiding people. So the very first co-host, Mike, please come on. Tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are.
Thanks, Merle. Mike Palmer. I'm a principal at NSAFE, and I want to appropriately start off by thanking you and BCSP and Dale Carnegie for sponsoring this podcast. But I experienced a lot of benefit and value I saw during the first season, and then seasons with Tiffany and Jason have been just fantastic. So I think it's great for the safety profession. I've spent 40 plus years in this profession, and it is as when I look at why did I want to do this? The reason I did is because I really felt like it was, as my wife would like to say, it takes a village. And you just coined it very well when you talked about the value this podcast brings by bringing people in with different perspectives to tell us about their successes and their failures and their lessons learned to help all of us try to maneuver our next steps.
Good.
So it's a pleasure to be here.
We're glad you're here. We're going to delve into that just a little bit more in a bit. So the second season of podcast, Tiffany, let us know who you are, your background.
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Tiffany Felix. I'm the Senior Vice President of Environmental Health and Safety for Paramount Global. I do have to apologize for my voice. People might not be familiar with hearing this tone, this raspy tone I have. This raspy tone, I'll tell you though, is the reflection of my Cal Berkeley Bears playing some good college football on last Saturday.
And so you were into it.
I was into it.
Well,
so.
we're just glad to know you weren't yelling at people
No.
safety issues.
Cheering on those Bears. Go Bears. So I have been born into environmental health and safety. So since undergrad, I've been in the same field. I love the field. I've worked in various industries, so many different ones, manufacturing, media and entertainment. This is my third media and entertainment company. I've worked in consulting for years. So I really do love the field. I think there's a lot of reciprocity. As much as I feel that I give in the realm of environmental health and safety, I receive just as much. Mm-hmm. And so my love language being acts of service, I think the field resonates with the kind of individual that I am. So.
And we'll look forward to hearing more about that in a little bit, because that's one of the great things about every one of you that's been a co-host, is the ability to learn from your perspective and hear from your heart and your soul of how you see things. And since we're all different, we get to enjoy those different perspectives.
Yes.
And then the man who could say, I am third. Jason, please introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about your background and your work.
Yeah, I would be happy to. Merle, first, good to see you.
Yes.
Tiffany, Mike, good to meet you too. So I'm Jason Kuntz, spent about 14 years with the 3M company, not 40 plus like Mike. And I wasn't actually born into EHS like my friend Tiffany over here. I started in sales. So I sold fall protection, respiratory protection, head, eye, and face protection for the 3M company. Did some industrial hygiene work. Ended up getting certified, became a CIH and CSP. And then my last role at 3M was something called a culture activation lead. And so what I did for the last 3 years is I traveled around, delivered workshops to our operational leaders, delivered more than 100 workshops in 36 countries in 9 languages. And then my wife and I welcomed our first child. We thought, it's going to be really difficult to have a healthy marriage, prosperous marriage, and to really show up for our child if I'm halfway across the world half the time. So for some reason that we are still waiting to understand, I left 3M in May of 2024 as we had our first child, bought our first house, made a big move, and now I'm speaking and consulting and training full time. So all prayers are welcome as we go through this journey in this new season. And I'm grateful to be here. It's good to see you again, Merle.
Nothing like a man that's willing to take on change and go experience it.
That's right.
Yes. So when Christy, the CEO of BCSP, and the board came up with this idea and talked to us about Dale Carnegie, and we said, yeah, but we need co-host. I'm just curious, Mike, we're going to start off with you. What was your immediate reaction when we approached you and said, would you think about doing this?
Well, when we were all sitting around that table in this building and kind of spitballing it and talking about it, the one thing that I felt like was, and this is going to sound bad, worth my time, where's their value here, right? Was the storytelling element. And I thought if we could have people that come on and share their specific experiences, what have they done that's just, they went, wow, that worked. That was great. These employees now are behind it 100%. Or, try this and, oh, no, we're not going to do that anymore. That failed miserably.
What is the value, Mike, of stories to safety professionals? Well, what do you see?
Well, there's plenty of things you can learn in school and in technical sessions and things like that. But, our job is a very important job, and it's a hard job. But I would tell you, I don't think what makes it the most difficult is the technical part. It's the soft skills part. It's learning people. It's learning what motivates people. What do people care about? How do you get people to care, not only about themselves, but being their brother's keeper? And so much so that it's not a reactive thing, right? We don't need a tragic accident to get people to. This is just part of what you do day in, day out, and making it a priority to be that, right? So to have some risk adversity that you're mixing with reality. And
that's been one of the beautiful things of all the hosts or the guests that we've had along the way. And we've had approximately, in the first 3 seasons, approximately 22 or 23 people that joined us for these. They were professionals, all different ages, all different backgrounds, different industries, but they had their own story. And the podcast has given people that opportunity to hear the stories of these people. The good, the bad, sometimes the ugly, but that's the reality of the work that we do. And for you, what do you think is perhaps a takeaway, a good takeaway for you from the different guests that we've had that stood out to you?
You know, when I was thinking about guests to invite to do this, I was thinking about, what discriminates them? I thought a lot of those people, but when it comes down to it, what really discriminates them from others that I see in the profession? And the word is passion. And I've always tried to use that myself. I mean, I was kind of raised that way anyway, to have passion with what you do everything 100%, live, love, work, everything at 100%. But what's interesting is, the examples from season 1, when I think of Steve Hawkins talking about being a OSHA regulator and going out and investigating his first fatality, right? And how that just all of a sudden, oh, this isn't a job. This is big, right?
This is life. This is real
and how
deal.
this changed his whole perspective of how he did his job every day. Chris Jeter talking about the experience of his dad with an occupational accident. Emily Gamblin, who is brand new and then going into an industry as a young female professional in a very high role.
Distribution
centers that aren't traditionally, don't have a deep safety culture traditionally. And she did an experiment with employee engagement that some would have thought would have been silly, but the feedback she got from those people that were truly engaged in safety, and then seeing it actually work as the numbers dwindled significantly. But what all three talked about was passion. And Tiffany and Jason, your seasons, I heard it in those guests too, right? And this job is hard enough to do, but to do it without passion, to do it without vision like that. So I think that's, I guess, my biggest takeaway is I love hearing the stories, but hearing people's passion towards keeping people from getting hurt and ill.
And Mike, there was one other thing. You said you started to research other podcasts about safety.
Yeah.
And we're not going to name off. Those organizations are doing their thing, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But you did find something that distinguished this, and I think it sort of relates to what you just talked about. What do you find distinguishing about these podcasts that BCS is sponsoring that makes it unique? It's somewhat of that idea of we're hearing human beings talking about experiences with human beings. Why is that so vital to remember? It's humans working with humans.
Well, and listening to other podcasts, I think the first thing that distinguishes it is just the genuineness of bringing people in, right? Having them share their stories, good, bad, indifferent, whatever, right? And hearing how they, engage themselves into their job, into their profession, and evaluating risk and how to connect with people. That collaborative. Tiffany, there were so many examples with yours of that. I just think that whole part of it, I've not heard that in other podcasts, right? And because it's kind of real in the whole conversation part. But I think that's it, if I would say a takeaway.
And that idea of we're having conversations with just human beings that have been successful, but it's not all success. It's sometimes gut-wrenching, and just getting to hear and relate to those different experiences
Absolutely
means a lot. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Tiffany, when they first asked you, said, we'd like you to come be a co-host. What was your first thought?
My first thought for anything that is asked of me is yes before it's no. I'm always a yes before it's no. So when they first asked me, it was immediate yes. And then I have to think about why would I say no, as opposed to no And why would I say yes? I kind of work from the former. And that's just kind of even how I do safety. Yes, let's figure out how do we do this safely before I say no. Always yes.
So after you said yes and pondered it, anything that...
I was excited about the opportunity to be part of something where it was going to be the collective of us having conversations with the larger group of professionals or people who are aspiring to be professionals.
And you had a variety of different guests come on. And for those of you that have listened to the podcast or are listening now, oftentimes we ask the co-host to come up with different people they know from their realm of influence that they believe could be helpful to us. So you had a variety of different people come on. You don't have to go through all of them, but tell a little bit about at least some of their professions or some things that have stood out to you about that.
Yeah, the guests, there was a long list, and then I had to shorten kind of the list, and we did that, collectively with everyone that's part of this podcast. I think that the guests that came on for season 2, their underlying theme, like the underbelly of that season, was collaboration. And I think those professionals have been collaborative if they have a primary function outside of EHS or safety, but they've had to be collaborative with safety people. Or if they've had a primary function of safety or environmental, then they understand the value of being collaborative with other functions within an organization. So if you're thinking about like Montrese Sampson, she's had a career in human resources, but Montrese is invaluable in the realm of safety. She's invaluable because her level of expertise within human resources is able to really work in parallel with safety as just as much of a priority as the human relations aspect.
Because in her work with CBS,
correct,
she helps to be in connection with the people who are out there in the streets,
that's right,
out there in the war zones, out there in difficult situations that are getting the stories. And we kind of forget about those people, that they have emotions and feelings
right,
and shocks that go through them. And so for her to blend those two together.
Exactly.
How important is it for the safety professionals who are watching right now and listening just to take time to realize I'm not the one only here, but we got to do this as a whole? Give us some thoughts on that, would you?
Yeah. And I'll probably say it now. You'll probably hear me say it another time.
That's fine.
For safety professionals to really, from my perspective, to be successful. And a lot of us measure success very differently. And I measure success not necessarily from the realm of statistical analysis, but I measure success from the perspective of so-called followers. Like if you're a leader, if you're a safety leader or any kind of leader, what level of followers do you have that buy in to the messaging, to what you're trying to put out there within the organization? And that's a collective. That goes both ways. That's not just EHS professionals, but EHS professionals, safety professionals listening and getting feedback from those that are, want to be part of this whole process, this whole collective. So for me, I really focus on the we, our, and us of it, and less, as minimally as possible, on the I, me, my, and you. And just changing our vocabulary to utilize the we, our, and us, and less of the I, me, my, and you. You'll start to see cultural changes, transformational changes within the organization.
Now, I will tell you that's interesting when we talk about Dale Carnegie principles,
Mm-hmm.
because when you look at the 30 human relations principles, over half of them specifically use the words other person, other person.
Right.
So it's not all about me, and the rest of them imply
Right.
that it's not all about me.
Right.
And just before we leave that, it's awful easy to get into that trap, though. I kind of like me. And I kind of like to talk about I, and not that these other folks would do. But why is that just remind us again, why is that so vital?
It's so vital because if it's just really a focus of the I, me, my, or you, even as safety professionals, and then you're struggling, and let's say you're looking at your analytical metrics, your numbers aren't going to look too good, Merle. They're not going to look too good, Mike, Jason. They're not going to look too good. So because if you, it's an entire organization. One person doing safety, one person saying I, me, my, and you need to do this, I'm creating this program, is just going to leave your organization one-sided, as opposed to really focusing on the we, our, and us, and really making some transformational changes in your safety program, in the pulse of what you're doing as an organization. And safety is really a collective.
As I mentioned to you earlier, in the Dale Carnegie organization, when we're training trainers, if someone will stand up and say now to the audience, I want you to do this, I want you to do this, we will kind of teasingly chide them and saying, we don't care what you want. And that's just a reminder back to, it's not I, it's what do we want?
Correct.
What is good for us?
Right.
People can respond to that so much.
And jump on board with that because it feels like an inclusive. They're included.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Jason, somebody tapped you on the shoulder, gave you a call, sent you an email and said, oh, do we have an opportunity for you? What was your initial thought?
Yeah, I think a few things. And I want to circle back to something my dear friend Josh Franklin actually said many years ago. And he used to work for BCSP. He's an incredible EHS professional and just an incredible guy. And he once told me, he said, Jason, you're in the right spot when you're feeling imposter syndrome about once a day. And I think we've framed imposter syndrome in the States especially as a really negative thing. Like you shouldn't feel like you're not meant to be here. Like you shouldn't feel, it's like, I think it's a beautiful place to be. I think it's a perfect place to be because growth and comfort cannot coexist ever. Nobody goes to the gym to be comfortable. You go to the gym to grow and challenge yourself and get better. And so my first response was like, we got Mike, we got Tiffany, I've seen some of these guests, like this is above my game and I'm not qualified for this. And then my brain goes to like what Tiffany said, she says yes before no, which I love. One of my old sales coaches, his nickname was Respirator Ron Mosca because he literally sold respirators for 30 years in the same territory. He said,
take a deep breath there, friends. Okay.
That's right. He said, you're kind of a fire ready aim guy. That's what he told me like 10 years ago. And I'm like, fire ready aim. I was like, okay. Ooh, so I really don't think things through before I say yes. Is that what you're saying, Ron? He's like, yeah, but it's not a bad thing because oftentimes we put ourselves in positions when we say yes before we let our logical brain or our croc brain say no, that fear brain. We say yes and then we figure it out from there. So for me, it was like, ooh, I feel not quite ready for this, which tells me I'm probably in the perfect place, number one. And then number two, I went to immediately to fire ready aim, which is which guests can I bring on that can bring ridiculous value to the BCSP's listeners. So that was a little bit of a thought process when I got the call, Merle.
And some of the people that you brought in, again, you don't have to go through name by name, but what were some of the highlights that stood out to you? Some of the messages that you heard came through that were so practical for folks?
Yeah. I think the message is that we're consistent across, and just at a high level, we're talking, we had CEOs, we had Super Bowl champions, we had globally renowned keynote speakers, we had college dropout plumbers turned globally renowned transformational leadership coaching and consultants. Like, there was all over the map. But the consistent theme was engagement, consistent engagement. And what's interesting is you could go around the room in any part of the world, in any industry, and you could ask EHS and operational leaders, if you were to improve your EHS performance, what things do you need to do? No one would ever tell you that the way to improve safety performance is to engage the people doing the work less. Nobody would ever tell you that. Yet, if you go across and you do quick surveys, because I do this in workshops all across the world, about 30% of companies are actually engaging their workforces in a meaningful way. What's interesting is I was at Arrowhead Stadium where the Chiefs play, I think the last like 2 or 3 time Super Bowl champions, right? So like they do some things pretty well.
Don't rub it in too
Safe
much
to
to
say,
those non-Chief fans, but that's okay.
They do some things pretty well. But it was a cool experience. I was delivering a keynote for a Fastenal event. This was just last week in Kansas City. And there's about 150 people in the room, and we're talking engagement. And a gentleman raises his hand. He's like, there's this Gallup research that shows only about 30% of the U.S. workforce is actually engaged in their day-to-day work. And he asked this question, which I think is the right question, but we're approaching it from the wrong vantage point. He's like, what do I do for those 7 out of 10 workers who are only showing up for a paycheck? I'm like, well, number one, we're labeling people as only showing up for a paycheck. And Keith said this on our podcast with him. He said, if you see a man as he is, he will remain that which he is, man or woman. If you see a man as he could be, he will become that which he could be. So if we label people from the jump as they only are showing up for a paycheck, that's all they're ever going to be to us. The reason I say we're approaching it from the wrong vantage point, back to engagement, is people are disengaged because we're not engaging them. I've never met a worker in my life in any industry where if their leadership is they're all in, they want to learn about them, focused on others, right? Focused on we are and us versus I, me, and you. Like, they show genuine interest in you. I've never met anyone that's disengaged. Yet, we're sitting back like, why is my team disengaged? Because you're not engaging them. That's why.
And just say, before you go on there, now this is rather indicting. So no doubt the problem could be us. Sorry out there. Sorry, yeah. but it is. Yeah. And so how does a safety professional have to take that in mind as they're looking toward working with their team and their groups?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. Rumi said this. He said, yesterday I was clever and I tried to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I'm changing myself. Mm-hmm. So we just really need to take a hard look in the mirror, double down on what's working, because the safety profession is doing some incredible things across the board, incredible things. And there's some things like we were discussing before, like the big stall that we're on right now for fatalities and serious incidents, where we really have to take a hard look at what's not working. And I think Tiffany's going to mention it in a little bit here. Mentors are a huge part of that. And making sure that when the people who have been doing it for so long in our profession ride off into the sunset because they deserve that, they've put in the hard work for years, that it's not just a knowledge transfer that happens as we leave, and I want Tiffany's perspective on this, but it's a mentoring and like a 360-degree perspective where we're mentoring the next generation, but then the next generation has the courage to challenge the current generation of maybe we should look at doing a few things a little bit differently to drive different results.
Yes. So as you've already heard folks listening in here, different perspectives, just takeaways that these folks had as we interacted, we worked with, we listened to, and we learned from each other as we talked. Now, one of the great opportunities that we have had as the Dale Carnegie organization is to not only be able to listen and to talk, but weave in these general principles about dealing with human beings. And Dale Carnegie, of course, wrote the book, How to Win Friends, Influence People, wrote a long time ago. But the beauty of those principles is they help us remember how do we work with people and how do we interact with them. So here's just a few principles that we focused on along the way. There were 30 of them. I think we probably mentioned all of them along the way, but there were a few that really stood out to us as safety professionals and how that we can put them into practice, not use them as a technique, but put them into practice to change who we are to affect the people. For example, principle number 4, become genuinely interested in other people. So that the people you and I talk with, as we walk by them day by day, we're interested in who they are, realizing they have a family, they have life experiences, they have a variety of different things that have made them to be who they are. And not just to say, I want to make sure we keep you safe, but to be interested in who they are. Another one, be a good listener. Encourage other people to talk about themselves. I'm telling you, folks, what would the difference be, talking about engagement, if we approached people and said, ask a question and then listen properly to show a respect for people and to hear their perspectives, which leads us to another principle. Make the other person feel important and do it with sincerity. Every human being that works with us and works alongside us, they want to feel like they are valued as somebody. And when we do that, then that allows us to go practice another principle that says, let the other person do a great deal of the talking. We think we're the ones that have to do all the talking because we're the expert. But what a difference it is when we ask the questions and draw from them and learn about their experiences in their particular niche in the workplace. And then there are 2 others that have stood out. One is called dramatize your ideas. Can we make our ideas not just mere truth, but to add energy and add belief and to say things from our heart and our soul and to illustrate it? Okay, so folks here, unfortunately in our industry, when people think about hearing safety talks and safety presentations, there is often one word that is associated with those. Usually it's not a good, positive word. What would you like to guess is the common word when people hear the average safety presentation that they use to describe it?
I was going to say exhilarating, Merle, but I don't think that's the answer you're looking for.
I think you got in on some stuff maybe all the rest of us need to have along the way. Any other guesses?
Boring.
Sadly.
Or same old.
Same old, irrelevant.
Yeah.
And yet, Jason, if we can turn them around and dramatize and add some pizzazz and punch and life to make it real. Carnegie said the movies do it, the TV does it. Why don't we do it with what we do? And then the final thought is, and Mike, it was one of your folks that really illustrated this, one of your guests. They praised the slightest improvement and they praised every improvement. And when people know that we notice what they're doing and they take a step forward and we acknowledge it, that will encourage them to keep moving forward. And that will encourage them to keep on progressing. And that's what we want for the journey. So I would just encourage you to think about these human relation principles and realize they're not something we use to manipulate people. They really come from a lifestyle that says, I value the human being. I believe they're important. I want them to be safe, and I'm going to treat them that way and watch for the response. So from our years of experience that are sitting around the table here, and from your experiences and what you've seen, Mike, we're going to let you start off. What would be an encouragement, a challenge that you would give to the listeners of this webinar that continues to drive us forward to improve and help our folks?
Now, when it comes to a call to action, I think that's another big benefit of something. When you have a platform like this, right, and you're talking for a lot of people, I think there's a responsibility and accountability to be impactful with it, right? And to try to share something that can make a difference, right? So that call to action. But what I've also found, if you're the receptor of that, you've got to feel like there's a need for action, right? Because if someone's calling you to action, but then you don't necessarily agree there's a need for action, you're probably not going to take it.
Because we're kind of stuck with the status quo. We kind of like just even keel.
Right.
Until there's a pain or need.
Right. So, and that's probably one of the biggest, blames of safety and whatnot is that being reactive, right? And people like to use that this is not something you can do reactively, right? But if you look at, okay, that call to action, why do we need it? And let's say you're accepting status quo, right? So that should be the question. Is where we are good enough? Is the progress we're making right now good enough? So I would say the first thing people have got to do is they've got to ask themselves that. Do they have the level of engagement that they think they need? Do they have collaboration among all facets of their company that they think they need to keep the workplace safe? If I ask that overall, the safety and health profession, one of the things I do is look at the lagging indicator. And I am a huge proponent of leading indicators to make an effective safety and health management system day to day. There's no question. Everyone agrees to that. It's like the engagement question you have, right? There's no one that's going to say you shouldn't have engagement, right? The same way, everyone's going to say you can't run by lagging indicators. Even boomers, even us baby boomers, we even agree.
Ooh, that's going pretty deep right there.
I know.
Real deep.
Even us baby boomers are going to say that leading indicators are the way to effectively have a safety and health management system day to day. But at the end of the day, you still have to look at your fatalities and your work-related injuries, and that needle needs to move. And it just does. It just frankly needs to be moved. You can be process gold, right? In the sense that leading indicators, right? But you've got to be results oriented as well. I mean, you've got to say, we got to have numbers. And if you look at the numbers in the US, and I can take you back as far as 2009, there's not been much movement. Fatalities have gone up since 2015. If you look at the number of work-related injuries, that 4 in 100,000 workers that have to have a injury requires medical treatment, right? That number has gone up slightly, right? But at the best, even if it's flatlined, is flatline okay? Is it okay that we've stayed the same for 15 years? It's not. And I think that's where the call to action is. Take a look at what you've got, right? So take a look at your system, and one is not the same for everybody, right? But one of the things I think that people can look at, if you look at where the industry is now versus back when OSHA was passed in 1970 and we were first looking at numbers, and if you look at the stats back then, our fatalities and injury rates just plummeted down, and they were fantastic, right? The charts were great, even through the 80s. Most of the 90s, they were great. Numbers were just falling because we were getting all that low-hanging fruit, right? And we were doing it a lot of ways by compliance, right? We were, it was this fear of compliance and corporations with safety and health manuals and policies and procedures, right? And following that and following OSHA. And I think we've picked all that low-hanging fruit. I think now we've got to look at the soft skills, and we've also got to look at risk. And we've got to be more risk-driven than compliance-driven, and see where evaluating significant injuries and fatalities, SIFs, have you gone and looked at that and looked at once you've identified those high risk situations, have you got the layers of protection in place that are independent and redundant of each other in case one fails that you have the other one? And are they based on a hierarchy of controls? And I think that introspection, which a lot of times works in every part of our life, right? That look in the mirror, I think that needs to be done on a risk-based process and not a compliance-based process. And I think that's what I would give you as the call to action.
One final thought though, Mike, that look in the mirror can be scary for people because, am I going to have to make an adjustment? But without the willingness to look at ourselves and ask those questions, do we really want to just stay the same status quo, or are we ready to step forward and be daring enough to say, let's make an adjustment?
Yeah.
Tiffany, from your perspective, what would you encourage us on?
I mean, there's a number of things that stand out as far as encouragement in order for the industry to continue to make the kind of progress that it should be making. I think there's a shift in the worker themselves, things that from a physical safety of the employee has been historically very high priority. And now we need to make a shift to the mental aspect, the mental health, the psychological safety. We're dealing with a different predominance in the workforce. Now, millennials are the predominant or the majority of the workforce. And I think they probably have a larger tolerance, a lower tolerance for mental health exposures in the workplace. And we do have mental health workplace issues. And I think in order to really start looking at things differently, there has to be a level of mentoring and coaching that happens. And that mentoring and coaching needs to go both ways, not just the seasoned baby boomer or Gen X EHS professional providing information and guidance to the Gen Z millennial professional. But I think there is definitively something to be learned from the millennial and Gen Z to provide to the baby boomer and Gen X.
Sounds like you're talking about a two-way street and not a one-way street.
Absolutely. Absolutely a two-way street. And then those of us that are in those generations of baby boomer or Gen X have to be open and receptive to that feedback that they lend to us. Because otherwise you are going to continue to have status quo. And with that information going both ways, I think that the mentoring and coaching should truly be a call to action where we are making ourselves available when someone reaches out. I get several reach outs on LinkedIn. And once again, always yes, never no. So I'm intentional.
I assume you don't have anything to do, and so you just willing to help out. No,
right.
Quite the contrary. You're a busy soul.
Busy soul.
But
that's a priority. That should be a priority for all of us.
You've had some experiences even where people reached out to you.
Yes.
And they were so appreciative of you.
Yes.
Why?
Yes, they were, because I made the time and they provided insight that they've reached out to others and they never heard back. So I'm really looking at and speaking to those of us that are EHS professionals and prioritizing the time, doing the give back, making sure you're open-minded and receptive to the feedback that comes from someone else that might not be as seasoned as you, might not be as educated as you, might not have the skill set that you have, but still has something to lend. And so let's just be receptive. Let's be intentional about making time. And it's not always just career coaching and mentoring. Sometimes it's lifestyle too. Some people just want to know. For me, I get, as a woman, not just a woman, but also a woman of color, how do you navigate these things? How did you navigate motherhood, being a woman of 3 children working in corporate America? How do you navigate being a Black woman and being in an executive management and things that come? So it's not always career. Sometimes it's lifestyle as well. And we all, as you said earlier, have a story. The dramatization is super, super helpful. And we can be instrumental in others' lives, and they can be instrumental in ours by making sure we're telling our stories.
And is that not a great use of our lives when we have had these experiences, some good, some bad, but
Absolutely.
we learn from them and we
yeah.
take those defining moments of our careers and say, not as the know-it-all, the old sage,
Absolutely.
but just said, this is what I learned from this.
Yes.
And that
yes.
can bring such enlightenment and encouragement.
It really,
to so
I've
many.
heard some amazing stories from young people, amazing stories by just taking the time. I mean, the level of resiliency that's out there amongst some of the younger generations is amazing. So, tap in if you need me. I'm here.
Good.
Mhm.
So mentoring is the call to action.
Definitely.
And Jason, from your perspective, what do you want to encourage our listeners to go after?
Yeah, so I want to double down on something Mike said and then something Tiffany said and then share something in addition to that. So I'm fully aligned with what Mike is saying with the focus on risk over compliance and doubling down on controls specifically, leveraging the hierarchy of controls, coupling that with essential skills. I think it was Krauss that said this. Krauss said, the only way to make the workplace safer is to actually make the workplace safer. Well, how do you do that? I'm not saying behavioral focused approach don't work. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the way to truly prevent serious incidents and fatalities, and we've now proven this before, is to actually leverage controls to reduce or mitigate or control energy, because it's high energy hazards that cause high severity events. So that's my first. I just want to double down on what he said because it's really brilliant what Mike is saying. Controls make the workplace safer, specifically around serious incidents and fatalities. And then to Tiffany's point, this is a horrifying statistic, and I can say this because I'm a millennial. 50 to 60% of the American workforce will be of the millennial demographic by 2025. 2025 is not
That's
far.
pretty close.
2025 is not far away, friends. It's pretty close, right? And I think there's just two approaches here. And I think it was Andy Stanley that said this. He said, when it comes to people who are different than ourselves, is we can be students of them and get really curious, or we can be critics of them and we can be judgmental. And there's no question that the demographics, right, the generations, we're all different in our own unique and beautiful ways. And we can sit back and point fingers of Tiffany's that way, Mike's this way, Merle's that way. We can say, man, this is really interesting. I wonder why Tiffany does that. Tiffany, tell me more about that. Mike, why do you believe what you believe around the focus on risk versus compliance? It's like we can get judgmental or we can get really curious. So I wanted to double click on the things that they said because I couldn't agree with what they're saying more. And then as far as from my perspective, call to action, I think there's a few different things. I think we need to take a really hard look, and people probably don't expect this, a really hard look at the self-care within our profession. Because EHS professionals are as passionate, back to Mike's point, about our jobs as any person and profession I have ever worked with. And oftentimes we try to pour from an empty cup, and we care for everyone else before caring for ourselves. So my first invitation and encouragement would be for people to eat well, to sleep well, and then to move their body every single day. What's interesting is you'll notice this. You don't need caffeine when you get up and you go out for a walk with your spouse or partner or the dog and you get some natural light in your eyes and you move your body. you don't need a cup of coffee. Like, you get energy from just being out there and moving and being in community. So that's the first thing. And then sleep, we sacrifice our sleep so much. And you notice the difference, those of us and those of you that track your sleep. If you have a 5 or a 6 hour night of sleep versus a 7 or an 8 hour night, you're a different human being. And man, what a beautiful way to go through life, to be kind, compassionate, connected, and caring, versus tired and ornery and sensitive. And just an hour or two of sleep can make all the difference in that regard. So that's my first call to action, right, is a self-care, focus on that. Second piece is to please delve into serious incidents and fatalities, SIF. In 3 years, if we're having this same conversation, every single person in the EHS profession, yes, but every single operational leader in the States and globally, when we say SIF, they should know exactly what we're talking about. So what is a serious incident fatality? Well, it's an incident that causes the greatest human and organizational suffering. Well, that's not really clearly defined enough. What if we define it as an incident where once someone experiences it, they're never really whole again? So it's life-altering type incident. Like, oh, okay, I can kind of dig that, but please delve into that. The best thing that I can encourage people to do is tap into Dr. Matthew Hollowell, University of Colorado, Boulder. Okay, same place as Coach Prime for football fans, right? Different, not football. We're talking serious incident and fatality. And just look into Construction Safety Research Alliance. They're doing more work around preventing serious incidents and fatalities, SIFs, than any other industry association, company, event, organization that I've seen. So just delve into that, get really curious about the different precursors between the types of different events. And then the last thing, this doubles down on what Tiffany's saying, is not just be a mentor, sponsor, or coach, but find a mentor, sponsor, or coach. If you work in a big company, I'll say even a medium to small company, and if you don't have a champion, good luck. And I found that out the hard way. My former company, I had 2 champions who would go to bat for me, and they would fight for me in rooms I was not in 24/7, right? They would just go to bat for me. One left the company for a new opportunity, and the other one retired. And I quickly went from opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to promotions coming my way to, all of a sudden my job got a lot harder, and I'm no longer in rooms that I used to be in. That is interesting. What changed? The only thing changed is I thought I had enough mentors, sponsors, and champions. I didn't. And so that would be my encouragement, is find someone like a Tiffany, right? Maybe like a Mike, right? I can do it for people as well, but find someone that's willing to fight for you in rooms that you're not in. And then second piece, because that's easier said than done, second piece is become the type of person that fights for others in rooms that they're not in. To Tiffany's point, people often miss that. They go, oh, I want people fighting for me in rooms I'm not in. Great, amazing. In order for you to earn that, you better be fighting for other people in rooms that they're not yet in, to double down on what Tiffany's saying. So those would be my kind of 3 CTAs or call to actions for our listeners.
So I've heard things of the importance of passion and from the heart, and things about mentoring and building others and not having it all wrapped up in ourselves, and even taking time for oneself and caring for them and looking for people you can champion, they can champion you, and perspectives. And one of the principles that really stands out as we're winding this down now is try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. And when we're able to do that, that certainly has a dynamic that helps us understand better, helps us learn better. You might be a person that is listening to this and say, I would love to be one of those co-hosts, or I'd love to be a guest on this podcast. There's a way for you to do it. What you can do is send an email to info@mybigsafetychallenge.com and explain your situation. And we are looking for people that would have perspectives and stories and be guests who'd be willing to help other people. And then just to wrap up our time, I've always been an admirer of the famous college basketball coach John Wooden, who the Wizard of Westwood had so many ideals and things he taught, not just how to play basketball, but how to live life. And one of the things that Wooden would teach his players, he'd say, now look, you throw a pass, or somebody throws you a pass, and you go in and you make a shot or you make a layup. I want you to turn and look back and either nod at the person who threw the pass to you, wink at the person, or point it out to him. And someone said, well, Coach, you think they'll be looking? He said, I guarantee you they'll be looking. Because every person that does something to help somebody else just wants to know, are they going to forget about me and realize I helped in this? Or are they going to acknowledge with that point? And I would just like to say to the three of you, thank you very much for blazing the trail and for guiding these discussions with other people. And for all of our guests that were on the podcast with us, although we can't name you all by name right now, thank you very much for giving your time. And we do owe a great appreciation to Christy, the CEO of BCSP and the Dale Carnegie organization, just for saying, let's team up together to make a difference. So thank you. And for all of you out there that are working hard and wondering sometimes, am I really making a difference? More than you can ever imagine, more than you ever know, you have this opportunity to affect the people that work with you, their families, their neighbors, their loved ones, through your example and your words and your influence. Thank you, and God bless.